Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
On Saturday, Steve Witkoff landed on the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier. On his X account, Donald Trump's envoy to the Middle East posted photos of his meeting with the Marines deployed in the Persian Gulf, showering them with praise.
Proud to stand with the men and women who defend our interests, deter our adversaries, and show the world what American readiness and resolve look like on watch every day.
The visit shows that the threat of U.S. military intervention in Iran has not been ruled out, despite negotiations between the two countries. On Friday, Oman hosted indirect talks between Witkoff and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. The discussions went well, according to both parties, who agreed to meet again soon. Tehran says it is ready to reach an agreement on its nuclear program, but its development of ballistic missiles is off the table.
The missile issue and defense matters are in no way negotiable, neither now or any time in the future. Regional issues belong to the region itself. Iran's internal issues also belong to the Iranian people, and no foreign country has the right to interfere in Iran's internal affairs.
Tensions between Iran and the United States have reignited by the crackdown on protests against the Islamic Republic last month. The Iranian government puts the death toll from the clampdown at around 3,000, but the U.S. NGO human rights activist news agency announced almost 7,000 and is investigating almost 12,000 more.
Welcome back to Training Tuesday. The Rob Maness Show's live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, today we're talking about the 4 classic levers of American power, or any country, really, if they're enough to be a superpower. It's diplomatic, information, military, and economic. No matter what other crazy stuff gets added to it, it's basically that. We in the military call it the dime. These are the tools that a true superpower uses to shape the world, protect its people, and keep its adversaries off balance. When they're used boldly and in combination, America wins. When they're ignored or misused, we get weakness, chaos, and decline. Just juxtapose the Biden administration against the Trump administration, 47, and you'll see what we're talking about. Look what's happening right now. We're putting real pressure on the Iranian regime, maximum pressure, again, that's choking their ability to fund terror and threaten global shipping. Militarily, we just seized a Venezuelan oil tanker in the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean that was trying to sneak crude oil into communist China. Another clear signal that America is done. We're done tolerating sanction busters, a diplomatic tool who prop up dictators and flood the market with stolen oil. On the information side, we're finally calling out dangerous ideologies that have no place in American public life, like a New York City mayor invoking the Prophet of Islam to justify open border policies that put American citizens last. Can you believe it? And economically, we're seeing record performance across the board, growth, jobs, energy dominance, exactly what Secretary Scott Bessent has been laying out for us. This is what American strength looks like when all 4 levers are pulled together with purpose and resolve and leadership, with no apologies, no hesitation. To break it all down with me today, I'm proud to welcome back a great American patriot and the sharpest analyst you'll ever meet, veteran TV news producer, former diplomat, host of The Real American Sunrise Early Edition, and writer of the must-read Analyst Substack, Jake Novak. Jake, welcome back to the show, my friend. Let's get to it.
Thanks for having me. And by the way, you left out the other piece of good news, which is that now that the Super Bowl is over, the 2026 New York Jets are tied for first place in the AFC East. So it's all good news.
At long last, I know you're wishing for Joe Namath to come back. It ain't ever going to happen, man.
No. It's not. It's not happening.
And I can talk about something about the Super Bowl this year. I had the video on my show yesterday to talk about it. Is the B-1 bombers that led the flyby right on the last note of the national anthem, which is very difficult to do. And my profession, the weapon systems officers, are the ones that control that timing and work that problem set from the time before they even take off until they get over the target. And we had another B-1 that they keep cutting the video up because the diamond formation or wedge formation was followed up by a second B-1 in full afterburner coming raging out of the clouds across the stadium. And the idiots keep cutting that part of the clip out. That's the best piece of it and the most exciting, quite frankly. So there, I got it out of my system again.
All right.
So I led with this because, like you, this is the biggest story that's happening right now. And instead, we got people talking about septic tanks and stuff out in Arizona and stuff. And God bless those folks that are having this problem with their mom, Ms. Guthrie. But that is not and should not be the biggest story of the day, either in the United States or in the world. And it is. And they're not talking about this big, big, big story. Why is this story so big?
Well, it isn't a big enough story, in the news media. And this is because, people think that when you talk about media bias, we're just talking about the left-wing bias. And it's a big one. But you know what, Colonel? It's only number 3 on the list of the top 3 biases. The number 1 bias is negativity, frightening stories, divisive stories. And the number 2 one, which I think is really at play here, Colonel, is the geographic bias of the news media. 90% of the news that we get generated in America comes out of people who live in Manhattan, who don't know anybody in the military, never had anyone in their families in the military. And some of them will quote I had a great grandfather who fought. No, that doesn't count. And, to me, this is such a huge story. This is a massive deployment in the Middle East. There are hundreds of thousands of American families affected by this in the most real way possible. This isn't someone who got upset at a Super Bowl halftime show. This is someone with a loved one who's in harm's way. And it's always in harm's way. Even if the shooting doesn't start, this kind of massive deployment is not easy to put together, kind of like the B-1 bomber coming out of the clouds. It's not easy to do this without any snafus coming out once in a while. And if we only had a news media that thought about the total number of people and where they can get people's attention. Again, this isn't a partisan thing. You don't want to be a rah-rah right-winger, and I get it. Okay. But can't you just at least say there are, like what I just said, there are hundreds of thousands of American families whose loved ones now are being deployed along with a massive amount of our weaponry and naval ships and the things like that. Why is this not the top story in America? And it's mostly because of that second bias, this geographic bias. The people who make the news decisions in America don't know anyone in the armed forces, never knew anyone in the armed forces, and have no idea what this kind of undertaking amounts to. There's your answer.
Yeah, folks, even with the high recruiting numbers that we have today, because we now have good leadership in the Department of War, only a little bit less than 1% of all Americans volunteer to serve in our military these days. So, Jake, your point is exactly right. These dang companies that do media should be hiring more veterans, especially veterans that have experienced all forms of combat. And they're out here available. But nobody ever calls. The phone never rings because they don't like our story. They don't like what we have to say.
They need it. They need it badly. I can't tell you how many local news stations I was working at and where there would be a shooting somewhere. And you'd have an executive producer of the main show. This, even like a place like I was working in Cleveland, where maybe that show was bringing in a couple $1 million in revenue back in the 90s, which was nothing back then. And you have an executive producer who there's a shooting somewhere. And the guy says, well, was that a Magnum 358? I mean, like, it's just incredible. Like, you have absolutely forget about the military stuff. They don't know about guns. And you don't always have to know everything about guns. But if you're in the news business, the local news business, you better know a little bit about guns or hire someone who does. And they don't do that.
Or at least run it through an editing system that will catch something that doesn't exist, like a 358 Magnum. It's a 357 Magnum, folks. Come on, don't you know anything? But this is the biggest story, I think. Here's why I think it is, and that's why I led off with the dime definition, because this story is the essential use of diplomatic, informational, military, and economic power in concert with each other in the right ways. Now, we don't know the outcome. We don't know if we'll end up having to go kinetic on them again. But this is what it looks like when things are being done right by the United States of America. And folks need to understand what they're seeing when they listen to any news coverage of this, don't they?
Yeah, and it's so important that you talked about all those things moving in tandem. Contrast this with the way Europe has been handling the Russia-Ukraine situation. They've been putting a military response to Russia. They've been doing diplomatic stuff, but at the same time, economically, they are literally bankrolling the war against themselves by buying all that Russian oil and energy. It's the exact opposite of what we're doing here. We're sanctioning the Iranian oil. We're choking them off economically. We're showing them diplomatic and military pressure. And we're making it clear to the rest of the world what's going on here. I thought the biggest story, specifically in this wider rubric that you discussed, was the fact that the United States warned every country in the world to keep their shipping as far away from Iran and the Strait of Hormuz as possible yesterday. That was a few days after the State Department told all Americans to get the heck out of Iran. I can't imagine there's too many there who have the opportunity to get out, but that was interesting. This is all in tandem. And if you think that it just makes sense and we shouldn't clap for it, again, look at what Europe is doing, where they have been bankrolling the war against themselves for a number of years now. And it's amazing how the only people calling them on it is the United States and President Trump. I mean, it's the most asinine thing I've ever seen. So thankfully, we're not seeing something like that here with the paradigm that you sort of just laid out for us.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite conundrum on the European thing is the Ukrainians buy 15% of their diesel fuel from India, which refines all of that diesel fuel from all Russian oil. It's laughable, but people's lives are at stake, and potentially American lives are at stake, and Western European lives are at stake if things go too far awry. Now, Iran is not the only target here, right? The Chinese, and to a lesser extent, the Russians, because they have a close production capability relationship with the Iranians. But the Chinese, especially, are one of the big targets of this operation, even though it's all about Iran from a messaging perspective. But there are multiple targets on this board that we are having an effect on in their thinking and their actions, aren't there?
Yeah, and it's really nice that there's a little bit of a smaller scale model of what China better be worried about going on right now south of our own border. The Cuban government is in serious, serious trouble now that we've choked off their Venezuelan oil and financial supplies. So, hey, China, you're going to be in a serious trouble if we get regime change in Iran and we get a regime that isn't going to play games with you anymore, isn't going to let you in and your engineers to do your Belt and Road stuff and your weapon systems, isn't going to give you a free flow of oil and energy. You want to have happen to you what's going on in Cuba right now? I think in a lot of ways, Colonel, what happened in Venezuela was meant as a signal to China for what we might do to them with much bigger players. And you can say, well, the Iranian regime isn't going to change. It's not going to move, but it certainly is closer to that than it was a few years ago, and it's definitely a much more plausible outcome. All the prediction markets out there have it as a rising possibility. And if I'm China, I'm really worried because the United States, this administration and this president right now it's really like a Goldilocks situation. With the thing that's always been rough in America is when you get a president reelected, is that as soon as he gets reelected, he's immediately a lame duck. This president is acting like that. It's still like his first term. Plus, he also does, but it's still a second term because I don't think he's running again. All that chatter about him doing that is really just a joke. So he really doesn't care, and he's just going to do what he feels is the right thing. Yeah. And we haven't had a president doing that probably since Roosevelt in his third term. That was probably the last time we had a president who didn't worry about the connotations of things because he was in like Flint. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's I don't think he's going to run either, but I've been wrong about Donald Trump before. And Bill Maher is making all kinds of he's got an ad out about that with Bannon when he was on his show that I seem to see every 5 minutes these days. I'm watching the wrong channels, I guess. So maybe he thinks he's going to do it. Before we go to the break, I just want to set the stage. The next segment, we're going to start with a clip of the Venezuelan oil tanker that wasn't captured in the Caribbean or the Atlantic, but it was captured by the United States Armed Forces in the Indian Ocean, and its destination was the Communist Chinese, because they depend a lot on oil from all sorts of sources, and Venezuela was a huge one, and we have shut that down completely. Not even able to get to China from the Indian Ocean. I'll be right back with Jake Novak. It's Training Tuesday. Pay attention.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now. And we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
U.S. forces have seized the Venezuela-linked oil tanker Aquila II after retracking it from the Caribbean across the Atlantic into the Indian Ocean. The ship was reportedly carrying about 700,000 barrels of crude oil bound for China. According to the Pentagon, the tanker defied President Trump's quarantine on sanctioned vessels trading in and out of Venezuelan waters, prompting a long pursuit. U.S. military forces boarded the vessel without incident, with video on social media showing troops fast roping onto the deck and crew being secured. This operation is part of an expanded U.S. campaign to enforce sanctions on oil shipments tied to Venezuela, a policy that has resulted in multiple tanker interdictions in recent weeks. February 9th's action marks at least the 8th U.S. seizure of Venezuelan-linked tanker, underscoring Washington's resolve to restrict crude exports not processed through approved channels. The drone and helicopter footage released shows a sniper overwatching the Aquila II during the boarding. The Pentagon said the ship was flagged to Panama and had left Venezuela earlier this year. The tanker seizure comes amid heightened political turmoil in Venezuela. Opposition figure Juan Pablo Guanipa was reportedly taken by armed men in Caracas shortly after his release from detention, deepening concerns over the nation's fragile leadership landscape. Allies are calling on the international community to demand his unconditional release.
Welcome back to Training Tuesday. The Rob Maynard Show is live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast, and we're having some technical difficulties with some of the streams on my channels. You can pick this up on definitely on the Facebook fan page at COL Rob Manus. And I haven't had time to check the Rumble channel, the Rob Manus Show, but you're probably able to get it there too, and probably on YouTube, the Rob Manus Show. But something's going on with the X video stream, folks. My guest today is Jake Novak. Jake has media experience, diplomatic experience. He is a very effective analyst in not just domestic issues, but foreign policy, national security, and international relations issues. Jake, welcome back to the Rob Manus Show. And I had to show the clip of the tanker there from the Indian Ocean, as I talked about before the break, because that's a big deal. That's a big deal. There are very few countries. I think there are probably no countries that can pull off what just happened in the Indian Ocean once a sanctioned tanker like that gets away from them.
Yeah, and I like the way that it's just so easy to understand. Like this isn't like, you know how we've been reporting for years about things going on in Syria and there's this little missile attack or a drone attack, and there's never any video of it for obvious reasons. And it's hard to kind of keep your mind. You need like a program in a sports game, which terrorist group is bad this week and which isn't. This is just so simple. It's a Venezuelan oil tanker that was all the way away from Venezuela, all the way in the Indian Ocean on its way to China. And we said, remember, the United States has taken ownership of your oil, Venezuela. And I don't care how far away it gets from Venezuela, we're going to demand control of it. And that's exactly what happened. Very easy to understand. The video is very clear. And those are the best kinds of messages on the international stage, ones that everyone can see and understand, ones that can't be spun by a news media guy or even a Baghdad Bob type regime reporter. They're probably just not going to report it at all, but people will see that video, and that's what makes that so effective.
Yeah, folks have probably noticed, but on my show, I don't always use an American video clip. Today I've used a France one, and I can't remember exactly where the Washington Examiner had that clip, but they got it from another international media organization. And that's because they tend to not sugarcoat things in the non-American media. I hate to say that way, considering we're the vaunted First Amendment nation that we're supposed to be, but that's just unfortunate the way it is. Now, this particular situation, the reason I picked it was it is a diplomatic and military force set of levers really working together. And then with some economic thrown in there, obviously the oil was bound for China, so you've got an economic lever in there. But without the adequate military capability, you can't enforce sanctions like what we just did with this particular asset.
Yeah, I mean, remember what Biden's response to these kinds of things was don't do it. But there was never any action like this to seize a tanker or something like that. And that's very important. It's really backing up words with action. And we just don't see it. We didn't see that enough during the Biden administration. We saw a lot of the opposite. And to me, again, a lot of people watching may not know a couple of things that are really at play here, which really exacerbate the situation, I think, in a good way. One is China doesn't have a lot of its own oil. I mean, some people might think a big country like China. Just to remind people, there is a big Chinese oil company called Chinese Sinopec, but it's mostly a coal company. They don't really have proven oil reserves. And for those of you who know your history, that was a huge part of what started World War II, that Japan didn't have any proven oil reserves at the time that petroleum was so important. That was a big reason for why Japan became so aggressive before in the years leading up to World War II, if you don't know that. So that part of the world, that's a big story that we shouldn't forget. The second thing is there's going to be people who are going to try to get away with saying, well, the United States is really getting aggressive. They're putting their hands in every part of the world. How dare they do that? China has us beat on that by 10 to 20, by a factor of 10, 20 to 1. China's got its hands in every country in the world, including ours, with different influence and different really intrusionary policies. Sometimes it's something as simple as the Belt and Road Project, which is really like selling crack, because roads, once you build a road, the expense of that is forever, baby. And you've literally created an addict for your product. So that's pretty simple to understand. But there's other things as well. I think here in the United States, the Chinese influence over our news media, I talked about it a lot last week. We had this huge story out of China 2 weeks ago about the number 2 guy in China getting purged and being accused of leaking nuclear secrets to the United States. And it wasn't covered by the mainstream media. And if it was buried in, on a Wall Street Journal page down below. And the reason is very simple. The Chinese investors in America's corporate media have made it clear, no negative or shaky stories about China. And so you don't see any of them. You don't see it. It's incredible. That was a sexy story. I would have clicked on it. On any nation, I would have been excited about it. I mean, I ended up hearing it from other sources. So, but you're going to hear, Colonel, a bunch of people responding like, how can the United States get so involved in all this? I mean, how dare they interfere in China? I mean, you have no idea how much China has interfered in all the other 160, 70 countries in the world, 190, and including ours. They're the most intrusionary country in the world. And all we're doing right now is finally standing up to it in a small way, frankly. We need to do a lot more, but that was a great thing we did with that tanker. Absolutely.
Yeah, folks, I just became an ambassador for a group called the Coalition of Military Excellence, and one of the members of that group is called the Vanguard or Vandenberg Group, I believe. They've got a new podcast video series out, and it's all about how China is interfering inside the United States. And there is so much activity, Jake, that they will never run out of material. They could go 1,000 episodes, 1 hour episodes, and never ever run out of new things to talk about. That's how bad China is embedded in our country and in other countries. That Belt and Road Initiative, what they've gone in and done, it's not just roads, it's airports and deep water ports. And once they get addicted to that, and it's in third world countries that don't have the money, so they give them a loan. And the contract says when you default on the loan, the Chinese government gets ownership of the asset. That's why they're building airfields and deep water ports, especially on that initiative. And that's how they've embedded themselves all around the world and have taken what some countries like the Solomon Islands, which were our staunch allies, post World War II, and now the Chinese are there.
And they tried it in Israel too. They tried it in Israel. I was very involved in the debate and also working in it from all different sides of the debate when China tried to buy the Haifa port. And Haifa, by the way, is a very important city in Israel, not just because it's a port city. By the way, it's the most Christian city in Israel. It's a Christian majority city. Also, the Baha'i faith has their temple there. Beautiful, beautiful place. And the Technion, which is the top tech university in Israel, which is saying something, is also located there. The Chinese, starting around 2019, started an attempt to buy and refurbish the Haifa port, which needed refurbishing. The Israelis were interested in it first. And then finally, the American allies of Israel and people within Israel said, you know what, maybe not. And what they ended up doing was very much scaling down that project and getting other investors. But another thing that happened at the same exact time was I had friends in the Israeli military who told me, we just got a directive. This was 2019. They got a directive. If you have a Huawei phone, don't bring it on base ever again. So that was at the same time, I thought to myself, how can they be even considering a China ownership of the ports when they're telling everybody in the military, which is essentially everybody of importance in Israel, don't have a Huawei phone on duty, which means basically you got to get rid of it. People aren't that rich there that they can have a bunch of phones. So get rid of your Huawei phone is what they were saying. And I thought to myself, like, that's in Israel. Imagine what they try to do to a country that has less technological expertise and has less of an economy to really rely on.
Yeah, and they don't have people that are inherently citizens in their countries to do the surveillance that's necessary to catch that kind of stuff. It's a challenge. Let's just put it that way. It's a challenge. China is not it's not as big of a superpower as the United States is, but it is a superpower at this point. And if we don't continue to be successful at pushing back on them, the Greenland issue is one of those places, in the Arctic Channel up there that's now open, that sea channel, then they will just become stronger and stronger and stronger. The reason why I wanted to talk about this tanker is it's a sanctioned oil, and that's a diplomatic tool. And in this case, this is military force being used to support the diplomatic lever of power. Things aren't always that way, but this is a fairly common thing. Actually, it's a common use of the American military, especially the United States Navy, to support diplomatic power. We've done it almost since our very existence.
Yeah. I think a great way to understand this is, let's pretend we're watching a crime show from the 50s. That sanctioned oil is like oil they're trying to fence. Like, we all know the Hope Diamond is probably worth $2-3 billion, but if somebody steals it and they try to sell it on the black market, they're only going to get a couple million, right? They're fencing it, which is an interesting thing here. And the U.S. Navy is acting like the cops, finding that kind of illegal diamond someone's trying to sell in an alley somewhere. That's really kind of what's going on here. But if you don't have the cops going after it, not only will you see more thefts, but the amount that we get from the sale of that stolen item will be a lot higher. So you're doing, this is so important about the economic aspect of this. Even when we don't seize any more tankers, the value of all those other tankers that are shipping around sanctioned oil, the value of their product just went down, Colonel, because it's like, well, I might get seized, and now I need to get rid of this real fast.
Yeah.
This is burning a hole in my pocket, baby, and I got to get it sold. And the person on the other side of that transaction knows that, and he's like, well, I know we agreed on $50 a barrel, but since you might get seized any minute now, I think you're going to take 25 and shut up. And that's what's going on here. So there's so many different levers in motion, and I find it's actually kind of beautiful to watch.
It is beautiful to watch because there's even I'm sure there's a tariff angle to this somehow that's working into it because Trump doesn't do anything that doesn't have an economic and a tariff angle in it. And one of the things it is doing, if we keep the captured ships, which we can do under the law of the sea, then it helps our inventory of oil tankers that we desperately need to build hundreds, if not thousands, more of to catch up with China, which can build 1,740 ships to our 5 every year. Think about those numbers. Well, we got to take our next break, Jake. When we come back, we'll talk some more about how China is embedded in the United States, and the video you're going to see is the most prominent example of it, even though China's never mentioned. We'll be right back.
What if millions around the world could access Bible teaching and worldview training for free right now without hitting a paywall? That's exactly what happens every day at worldviewtube.com because of the Worldview Weekend Foundation. We don't lock our live stream behind PayPal. We don't restrict our content to members only. Instead, the Worldview Weekend Foundation helps cover the cost of delivering free educational and ministry programming to people across the nation and around the world. And it's not just programming. My Sunday night church service, where I taught verse by verse through Revelation for 18 months, and now I am teaching through the book of Daniel, is made possible through the support of our church, Worldview Weekend Foundation. If you believe this kind of truth-centered biblical teaching must continue, donate today. Go now to worldviewfoundation.com. You'll also find our mailing address and phone number there if you'd rather give by phone or mail. That's worldviewfoundation.com. Thank you.
And I consider my own faith, Islam, a religion built upon a narrative of migration. The story of the Hijrah reminds us that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a stranger too, who fled Mecca and was welcomed in Medina. Surah An-Nahl 1642 tells us, as for those who immigrated in the cause of Allah after being persecuted, we will surely bless them with a good home in this world. If faith offers us the moral compass to stand alongside the stranger, government can provide the resources. Let us create a new expectation of City Hall, where power is wielded to love, to embrace, and to protect. We will stand with the stranger today, tomorrow, and all the days that are still to come. We need not accept suffering as unchangeable. We need not treat hatred as the natural state. We have the power to set ourselves free.
Welcome back to Rob Mann Show. It's Training Tuesday, and we're live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast, and we're live on YouTube at the Rob Mann Show and on Facebook today. Our other channels are having some difficulties today, and my guest is Jake Novak. And Jake, that very short clip there's more to it, but I think that some of the people that voted for Mamdani to be mayor of New York City are now realizing what a huge mistake that they're made. But the power behind that guy, I believe, is the CCP in China. And through various means, they are the ones that supported him to get elected.
Well, yeah, I mean, the biggest architect of the whole plan to use open borders to undermine a society, and that's happened before in our history, has been China, with obviously a big assist from George Soros and his foundations and his sons and everything else like that. But China understands that the undermining of the United States coming from open borders was one of their best shots to do so, which was why so many Chinese nationals were crossing the border during the Biden administration, which had a lot of people scratching their heads like, wait a minute, I can understand Venezuela and Mexico and stuff. Where are the Chinese guys coming from? That's because they were there to direct the operation. They weren't just taking advantage of it and joining the trip. They were kind of the counselors on the hike. You know what I mean? That was what it was like. So that was very obvious. Listen, that clip that you just played blew up my brain all weekend. I made a big deal out of it. I made a big video out of it. I just want everyone to understand, everyone who saw that video, was complete. What he was talking about was a complete lie. Muhammad was not welcomed by the people of Medina. They didn't like him. And Muhammad returned the favor by calling for the killing of everyone in Medina. That's the model of open borders we want to follow. Some guy coming in and telling everyone to kill everybody in the town. And by the way, they did kill a lot of the people in the town. And Muslim migration, I mean, a migration being popular. What is he talking about? If you go on you can't go on the pilgrimage if you're not a Muslim. You can't go into the city of Mecca at any time if you're not a Muslim. It's the most repressive anti-open borders religion that you can think of. And by the way, I'm actually not even criticizing it. I'm just saying what it is. This is their religious principle. They don't believe that non-Muslims should be in a particular holy site. That's their religious belief. So either Mamdani is a complete idiot about his Muslim faith, which is possible. Remember, this is a guy whose father was a tenured professor at Columbia, and he said he was black on his application, and he still didn't get into Columbia. And I happen to know, because that's my alma mater, they do bend the rules a little bit on faculty's children. Most of the time they don't have to, because the kids end up usually being pretty brilliant anyway. Yeah. He still didn't get in, so he must have been a dope in school. Or, and by the way, these two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, or he's a liar. He knows darn well that Islam is not it's the opposite of an inclusive faith, and it doesn't allow mass migration into its cities, into its countries at all. Not then, not now. And for him to say this is the example we want to follow is just incredible. Yeah. Go ahead.
And next to the Chinese, Islam is the next level of conquering by immigration. I mean, it's built into their ideology. Which is why I don't believe Islam is a religion. I believe it's a tyrannical government ideology that is intentionally made to look and sound like a religion, and that even down to their concept. You mentioned that he was lying. Probably he is lying. He's not a stupid guy. He may be a little on the low intellectual side, but he's not stupid. He's lying. He knows he's lying because he knows Islam. He is Islamist. And Taqiyya encourages him to lie to achieve the Islamic goal of conquering every piece of dirt that's not occupied by a believer and that's occupied by unbelievers.
Yeah, let me flesh that out for you a little bit for those who are watching and not really understanding exactly what the Colonel is talking about. Both Judaism and Christianity, as much as they would prefer to have sovereignty, political sovereignty, they're both religions and religions that you can completely practice without having control of the nation that you're living in. Now, in the case of Jewish tradition, unless you're living in Israel, there are a number of commandments you can't fulfill. But even if a foreign country, God forbid, takes over control of the land of Israel, you can still be a fully practicing Jew. Christianity, with its focus on faith, obviously doesn't need to have political sovereignty. It's one of the problems that people have with the Vatican and the old days when there were Christian, the church was actually running countries. It was actually quite problematic for them. So but that is not something that Islam has yet been able to work out for itself. Islam as a religion being able to live in a pluralistic society where they don't have control of the government, where they're not the majority, where they can live in peace without trying to conquer the political reality, the political landscape. That's not something Islam has figured out yet. So, and that makes it different from Judaism and Christianity. Yes, we prefer to have a state of Israel where the Jews have control of a state. We prefer to have a United States where Christian principles, well, we hope that'll happen, aren't abrogated by the government, where we're not forced to teach things that are against Christian faith, and we're not forced to use our taxpayer money to pay for abortions or for trans education or trans surgeries and things like that. So we've got ways to go here in the United States too, but we can still be good Jews and good Christians even if we don't control a country politically. Islam hasn't figured that out yet, which is why it stands out and why it's having such a negative effect on the world, on the geopolitical scene for the last hundreds of years, not just the last 100 years or so.
Yeah. Even simpler, Jake. Here's how you know, folks, if something that's calling itself a religion isn't really a religion, it's a form of government and governance and tyranny. because take a look around. In the Jewish state of Israel, there are no religious police that walk the streets and patrol enforcing Jewish religious law. In the United States of America or any Christian country, let's go to the Vatican. There are no religious police enforcing Christian religious law and behavior anywhere. Nobody says you will wear something on your head to go into the Catholic Church. Nobody says you have to wear a yarmulke for certain occasions. There is no authoritarian part of a government that does those. And in Islam, go to Riyadh. Go visit Riyadh, and you will find the religious police. Go to Tehran, and you will find the religious police. And every other Islamic nation that exists, that is what you will find, and that tells you that it's not really a religion. It's a government.
Yeah, there's one exception, though. As a Jew, if I find out you're buying Lender's bagels and consider them real bagels, then I will arrest you. Other than that, that's not a real bagel, folks. I'm sorry. It just isn't, even if you toast it. Other than that, yes, you're right. Yeah,
he's still joking, but this situation creates a challenge for the old dime, the diplomatic, information, military, and economic power, which most people think of using those forms of power externally, but they're also intended to be having a positive effect on your internal situation inside your country. A piece of the diplomatic piece of this is when Trump stops immigration and entry from countries that support the creation of Islamic terrorism. That's a diplomatic tool, right?
Yeah. And the Chinese, by the way, they know about Islam being a dangerous tool. That's why they put all their Muslims in their country into a de facto concentration camp. That's why they've done that to the Uyghurs. But that lesson hasn't been lost on them. They think to themselves, well, if this is something that could undermine our regime, maybe we can use it somewhere else. By the way, that's the way they kind of thought about COVID, right? They saw that COVID was deadly in their country, and they thought, well, let's start exporting it elsewhere and see where that leads us. And I think they feel the same way about Islam. They know that large Islamic populations will not come into a country and just be happy practicing their religion and their culture. They'll start to want to be involved with governance and trying to make Islamic law the law of the land. Again, to go back to Jewish law, one of the reasons why Jews have survived and thrived for the last 2,000 years is, starting about 2,000 years ago, the rabbi said that whatever country you live in, that's the law. That law now becomes equal to Jewish law. So someone said, well, what if the country says you have to eat pork? Well, then you can't go to that country. But if you're in a country that says the law is you pay this taxes, you vote this way, you serve in the military that way, you take out your garbage on Tuesdays, then that now is equal to the level of our religious law, as opposed to we will go into a country and now take over the law of the nation and make everyone our religion. That's a big contrast. And it's a reason why one culture has really thrived, because when you have to follow the rules of the place you're going to, the chances of you becoming closed off intellectually and economically are way down. So if you have to follow all the rules of the country, you need to learn their laws. You need to learn their science. You need to learn their culture, which leads to tremendous economic success and intellectual success, as opposed to leaders from a country, from another religion, that say, stay closed off, don't interact, which is why you end up only owning convenience stores and driving Ubers, as opposed to becoming, opening hospitals and universities. That's a real contrast. And the Chinese know darn well that that's what these populations do. They'll undermine themselves. Well, by the way, undermining themselves is keeping them poor and miserable as well. It's not like they enjoy the whole process. Everyone's a loser when these groups come in.
Yeah, and that's why, the Chinese influence inside of our country it just covers everything from buying farmland next to strategic military installations to buying manufacturing capabilities, and even buying more farmland than is even close to military installations. They just buy it to own it and buy it up. Smithfields, I think, which is a meat packing company. I don't buy it anymore because it's a CCP-owned company. I refuse to do it because the CCP and the People's Liberation Army own all Chinese companies in one form or another, no matter what kind of cloaking they try to put on it. But it's very difficult to get our American politicians to understand that and act to prevent them from getting a foothold in all of these places. Our universities, I think, is the prime place where the Red-Green Alliance, the Islamist Marxist CCP alliance, is being it's being brought together, it's being watered and fertilized and growing, and that's where Mondani comes from.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned Smithfield, because 25 years ago, the New York Times actually did a pretty good series. They put a guy undercover working at a Smithfield meat processing plant. And one of the things that he wrote about was how almost everyone in that plant was an illegal alien, that this was real, and they were being abused. One of the things I talk about all the time is don't forget, folks, on the issue of illegal immigration, we have the high moral ground all the time, because illegal immigration is slavery in every way that you can define it. And if you read those articles from 25 years ago about what's going on in Smithfield Farm Meat, which is still going on today, you'll understand it's slavery, man. I mean, the managers get into the faces of the people cutting the meat off the bone and yell in their face that they're not going fast enough. It's brutal work. And that was one of the reasons why China targeted Smithfield Farms, because they knew it was a big illegal immigration clearinghouse in this country. It still is. All these meat processing plants are. And it was one of the reasons why they did that. Because again, their policy is to flood this country with illegal aliens. And why not take over a company that facilitates that in a big way?
Yeah, and the agricultural industry, which includes meat producers and all that, really lines up with their attempt to infiltrate deadly diseases that attack not only plants and animals, but human beings. I don't know if you saw the news last week, but another illegal biolab was found in Nevada, beyond the one that they found in California, but had been created out of that one. We got to take our last break, Jake. When we come back, we will talk about the economic performance of the United States and why it's so important, and it's how it's one of the things, one of the levers of power that is doing very well, and it creates the conditions for success in all these other areas. We'll be right back with Jake Novak.
You woke up with a sore throat and a low-grade fever. You know you are getting sick, so here's your choices. You can get sicker and miss work. Try to see a doctor this week, or sit hours in a crowded waiting room at urgent care.
I have a smarter option for you. Open your medical emergency kit. Match your symptoms to doctor-recommended prescription in your booklet and take the right meds now and get well faster.
This is not a first aid kit. It's like having an urgent care in your home. It includes doctor-prescribed medications to treat over 39 medical issues like respiratory infections, strep throat, pneumonia, UTIs, and more.
No waiting to see the doctor and no standing in line at the pharmacy. It's right here.
Every home should have at least one medical emergency kit, and here's how to order.
Go to worldviewhealthcare.com. Your kit to treat dozens of common and serious illnesses is rushed to your door. worldviewhealthcare.com. That's worldviewhealthcare.com.
The emergency kit available at worldviewhealthcare.com. Make sure you don't have to go to urgent care. I got pneumonia. I didn't have to go. I took this last year. Stayed at home, went to bed.
Laura, the numbers have been incredible. That we had 4.3% recently for the third quarter, and 4.3% is all in. The government shrank 0.4, so the real number was 4.7. So that is a 4.3 private sector number, Laura. And you know what contributed the most? I've been seeing it. I was in the investment business for 40 years, and trade. Exports exceeded imports. Our trade deficit shrank. We're back down to 2009 levels thanks to the president's trade agenda, and it's growing GDP.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. Economics, the economy, the economic lever of power. We've been talking about the superpowers, levers of power, the diplomatic, informational, military, and now economic levers of power, and how they work in the real world. And I think Scott Bessent is probably the secret weapon and the most valuable player, MVP of the first year of the Trump administration. The man is a machine. He's a machine. He thinks on his feet and he knows his stuff. And that was from early January. My guest today is Jake Novak. And Jake, I wanted to ask you, that was from January 10th. Why is that not a story? When you go and research like I do for my shows, if I'm going to do something on the U.S. economy, I could not find a positive recent story on the United States economy anywhere that was on video for me to use for this show today. I had to go all the way back to a Fox News clip of Scott Bessent from January 10th. And you're talking about those numbers. Those numbers are what politicians like me have predicted when we were running for office. Of course, we could get back to a GDP of 4 and 5%. When you have people like Barack Obama and Bill Clinton saying, no, it's 3% or less and blah, blah, blah. Well, no, of course we can, because this president and his team understands things like trade. And the economy's got to be strong to set the stage and the conditions for these other levels of power to be workable, don't they?
Yeah, well, if you think it's bad now, because you said you've been looking for the last few weeks, you should have seen it what it was earlier in the last year. In April of last year, when President Trump announced the tariffs, the news media really got together with a daily lead story talking about how terrible the economy was and how everything was going to fall off a cliff now. And what we're seeing for the last few months is the realization that that didn't happen. So now they're really not even talking about it that much. So what you're seeing is the quiet and the not reporting of the positive news. But believe me, a few months ago, you would have seen even more negativity about the economy. So that was one thing I want everyone to remember, because in April, they went all in on this negative story. And I feel bad for people, because there obviously were a lot of people who sold their stocks and their investments in April of last year, and they missed out on a huge run to even higher levels. We're at Dow well over 50,000 now. You missed out on a lot of money. So you shouldn't listen to these kinds of people. But there's a couple of things that everyone needs to remember. First of all, the Colonel and I are not stupid. We know that even if the economy is really strong in America, it's very difficult to talk about it all the time, because no matter how well the economy is going, there's always going to be a significant number of people who are not participating in the good news. And you don't want to come off insensitive or oblivious to that. You know, George H.W. Bush had a lot of problems in his campaign to win re-election in 1992, but him looking at his watch and during the debate and not seeming to really even pretend to care, which is sad that pretending to care is worth something in this world, but it is, sadly, about the economic plight of Americans at the time. That really buried him. So there was that. But look, there are a couple of things here that are really, you talk about these good numbers that Scott Bessent just talked about, but here's one of my pet peeves, because Scott Bessent is so good. I agree with you what you said. I think that Steve Mnuchin, the first Treasury Secretary during Trump's first term, was just as good on policy. He just wasn't as good on TV as Scott Bessent is. He wasn't as quick with the words. But one of my pet peeves, Colonel, is when even people who support Trump, don't know about some of the most crucial positive economic policies. During the first term, and this has been extended during this term, he doubled the standard deduction for people who don't itemize their taxes. Gosh darn it, if you're a Trump supporter and you're not talking about this regularly, shame on you. This was the first trickle-up tax cut in the history of this country. It finally worked. The Democrats have been promising it for years. This was basically the blue-collar tax cut, and it played a huge role, not just in a better life for those people who got that tax cut, but for the economy in general. Now, during this term, we've had the one big beautiful bill, and this is something I don't hear enough about. One part of that bill basically says that if you are a mid to small size business and you're buying something for your business, a physical item, a laptop, a truck, a dishwasher, it's almost 100% deductible in every single case. This is a massive shot in the arm for the American economy. We're going to start seeing more of the results of it. I'd like to see more Trump supporters talking about it, or just people who report on American economics talk about it. And of course, all we're hearing, and it's still pretty good, is that everyone should expect a much bigger tax refund this year. That's great, but there's so much more going on that isn't being talked about. So, Colonel, your point is taken about the mainstream media and the people who hate Trump, and they're hopeless. But we better not use that as an excuse for us not to talk about it. We've got to start talking about these policies more, because just so that people hear about it. If there's a small business out there that doesn't know about this tax rate on buying equipment, gosh darn it, they better learn about it fast, because they're missing an opportunity, let alone doing something to promote, a political ideology that we support.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Actually, I'm working on my taxes right now, and I bought a brand new desktop computer for the company this year, and we'll see how it works, because I can always use tax help. Probably make too much money sometimes, and not enough at others, and everything. And what about these Trump accounts for kids? People aren't talking about that either.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a simple way of basically saying, for how many, again, it's funny how, Trump is a lot like Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon won, and everyone should read a book about President Nixon, written by an author named Doug Schoen, who is a relatively level-headed Democrat. He wrote a book about President Nixon years ago, and one of the themes in the book was how Nixon stole a lot of the Democrats' agenda, from ending the Vietnam War to providing drug treatment for people who were hooked on heroin. And by the way, Nixon's heroin program was the most successful anti-drug program this country's ever had, because he basically put people on methadone, which doesn't make you into the greatest situation in the world for you, but it works.
Right.
Trump is doing this too. For years, we heard about the liberals saying, well, 401ks are nice and IRAs are nice, but what about everybody else in America who doesn't work in a corporation and can't get, you heard the liberals whining about this for years, but they never did anything about it. What the Trump accounts for children are is very simply a 401k-like account that you can open for your child at birth, that works like a 401k, works like an IRA, and you don't have to work for a corporation. You don't even have to work. You can just make a contribution every year or not. Hopefully you are, and you'll get these major breaks from it. This is basically giving everyone an opportunity for a 401k. I know the Rand Pauls and the Thomas Masseys and all the libertarians are like, oh, we can't do that. You know what? That should be the worst thing that we do with government interference, creating something that already exists by government fiat, which is a 401k, which was it's not a business idea. It was a government bill that passed it. It was a Senate bill. So why not? Why not extend that to everyone in America? It's already something that's part of our economy anyway. It's never going to go away. They're not going to get rid of 401ks unless the communists take over. So why not extend it to everyone, which is exactly what this is. And it literally steals a talking point that the left had for many years and was never able to do anything about it, because I don't think they really care.
And you know what a lot of people are missing about this new program, Jake, is that if your child was born in 2025 up to today, I think, going into the tax due date, anytime in there, if they were born this year, this past year, the government puts $1,000 initial funding into that account, $1,000 at birth. Think about where that's going to be. If you do nothing else with it, where that could be at age 18 or 21 or 30 and everything. And I was just watching the press briefing before the show started, and Carolina was talking about how if parents will just put in light contributions to that on top of that $1,000, by age 21, you can expect to have a $1.2 million account right there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's phenomenal. And it just grows exponentially after that, as long as you don't mess with it and you keep adding to it.
Yeah, and I'll contrast that to what the left wants, universal basic income, where we're just going to pay people for breathing, which has absolutely no participation from you. I mean, this is something that will bind families together more. It'll be more of a participatory thing, a little bit of ownership. We used to say that all the time about public housing projects. Like maybe a way to get public housing projects to be better and safer would be to offer a rent-to-own type paradigm for anyone who has the money to do so. No one ever did that, though, I don't think. And so this is an ownership type thing that is not a handout. Yes, you could say, well, that $1,000 handout, I don't like that. Yes, but it's basically it's a key to open a door, and you got to walk through it, and you actually still have to participate in it. And that is so much different than just universal basic income, which is basically what rich people want because they're afraid of getting mugged on the streets, and they don't understand that poverty doesn't cause crime. It's the other way around. Crime causes poverty. All these countries that have UBI are going to end up with either even bigger crime problems, not less, because you can't pay off. Poverty is not what causes people to rob you. It's the fact that they have no morals. That's what causes people to rob you. That's why rich people are just as likely to rob you as a poor person.
Yeah, in some cases, in some ways, even more likely to rob you than a poor person.
Yeah, because they're good at it. They're pretty good at it. That's right.
They are pretty good. Well, something happened over the last few days in Japan. Huge election over there. I don't know why I don't like using the term right wing, but the more conservative group took complete control of the legislature, and that's the new prime minister, Takachiki, I think her name is. It's her coalition, but they have a big enough majority where they can change the Constitution and get away from this pacifist Japanese self-defense force and actually become a true ally of the United States and the West, and and provide that wedge against communist China and communist North Korea that we've needed for so long. And they say they're going to do it. But she's got a meeting with Trump before he goes to meet with Xi, and Trump said there's some big trade deals in the offing. What can we expect from an economic perspective with both of those countries from Donald Trump?
Well, we've come full circle in this program. You know, Colonel, we started with talking about stories that aren't being covered enough. This story is not being covered enough. First of all, where are all the women's libers? We have a first-time female leader of Japan, a country that didn't even allow women to participate to vote until Douglas MacArthur shoved that down their throats, rightfully so. And my uncle was his top interpreter at the time, so I have some intimate details about that story. If you ever want to do a show about that, that was a big thing that MacArthur stood for. MacArthur was very influenced by the women in his life, his mother and his second wife, and he knew the value of having women involved in a government. And so anyway, that's one thing. Second of all, a good old-fashioned landslide. We could use one of those in this country. It was a massive landslide, which is a good thing. And also, but why isn't it getting covered? Same reason as we talked before, because China is the mortal enemy of Japan, and China's investments in American newsrooms will not allow a strong positive coverage of what's going on in Japan right now. This is a major story. By the way, the markets in Japan have been cheering this big time. We've had 2 days in a row of the Japanese stock market, the Nikkei index, up rallying 3% on Monday, more than 2% today. That's massive. And so that's because they're like this leadership, but they also, because of what you also just said, they now believe that there's going to be a major trade deal that really means something, that's going to be announced before April rolls around, or in April. And so they're cheering all of these things, and you don't hear it. Not only do you not hear it on CNN or ABC or NBC, but it's not really even being covered on CNBC, my old channel. It's just an obvious scandal. They are so China whipped. They're China whipped. Our news media is China whipped, and they won't report on this stuff, even though it would be a clickable story. A woman, a woman leader of one of the most traditional patriarchy, and they're not even celebrating it. They don't even know about it. I bet every person who subscribes to Ms. Magazine, if they still have subscriptions, doesn't know about this, which just goes to show how feminist they really are. They're not feminists. They just hate white men. There's a difference. There's a difference.
Yeah, there is a difference. Well, we got to go. Thank you, Jake. But I'll just remind everybody, we cover these big stories on this show intentionally, and sometimes we do it more than once in a week intentionally, because somebody's got to do it, and this is America.
Yeah, I mean, and there's you got a lot of opportunities, because they're just dropping the ball. I literally would like to do a 1-hour show every night doing the big stories everyone else didn't cover, and it would be higher rated than everybody else.
Absolutely. Well, man, thank you very much. You can find him on X at Jake NY, Substack, and everything else, man. Tomorrow, Austin Peterson, former presidential candidate in the Libertarian Party. He's a Republican, and he's got a new concept that he's talking about called libertarian nationalism. And you will not believe how close he and I are. I consider myself a liberty Republican, but I think I'm really a liberty nationalist, because he and I have become very close in our viewpoints over the last couple of years, especially since Trump was reelected. I'll see you then on the Rob Maness Show.